And continue. Yesterday we learned the Gemara about having schach that is put up either to dry, and then you change your mind and want to use it there for actual shade, for schach, for kosher schach. So you put it there for the wrong purpose initially, or maybe you put it there for a good purpose, but we're afraid that a different time you might put it there for the wrong purpose, for drying purposes. So then you might have a rabbinic decree of, even though you put schach there that should be kosher, but since it's so similar to doing this type of same act in a non-kosher way, so there could be a rabbinic decree that it's not, that you can't do that. You can't use that for schach. And then there was this other case, which is really a Mishnah later on, which is called Choitet Begodish, where you dig out of this Godish is like a grain heap, or it could mean a haystack, but it could be both. The Meiri learns that it's actually grain, and you dug out from the grain. Now, why is grain kosher for schach? Grain is edible. So how does the Meiri learn that you dug out from a grain heap and you're using the top stuff for schach and the side stuff for walls, and you dug out this hole inside the grain? Why would that be a kosher sukkah? Food is makabel tuma, and it's not eligible. It's not eligible for schach. It's not usable for schach. So the answer is that the Meiri is relying on the fact that you have so much more in the grain. There's so much more of the stalk than the actual kernel that it's batel. It would be nullified, and you would have kosher schach with your grain. So you could learn the godish. The simple meaning of godish is generally grain that's piled up, or you could just learn more simply that it's hay. And hay doesn't have anything edible for human. It's not human food. Hay is edible for animals, but that doesn't make it makabel tuma. Doesn't make it susceptible to impurity, and therefore the simple way of maybe choited begodish might be just to translate it that you're digging out from a haystack, and you're making yourself a sukkah inside. Now the problem with the case of the choited begodish is the fact that it doesn't say clearly what else you did. Like, did you also shake it and lift it up for schach purposes? Like, it doesn't spell that out. It just says that it's your choited begodish, and it's not a sukkah. It's not kosher. You dug out from this. Let's just translate it as a haystack, and you dug out from the haystack, and you so if you didn't shake it or lift it up, lift up the schach part, and instead you just dug out and that's all you did, and it says it's not kosher, so that we'll understand to be a biblical problem. Now, if you want to learn that it's talking about that you actually shook the schach or lifted up the schach, then why would it not be kosher? That would seemingly be a perfect sukkah. You've corrected everything you did wrong. So the answer is that in that case, there might be a logic that maybe rabbinically there's a problem, just in case you don't do that. In case you might come to, there could be a rabbinic decree against that, and therefore it's possible to learn that choitet begodish would be a rabbinic problem and not a biblical problem. The term the Gemara uses for such a problem is the gzeras oitzer, that it would be similar to the way you would dry out your twigs in order to use later on for firewood. And so you might want to store them. So you're drying them out for storage, gzeras oitzer. So the same term you could use for the digging out of a haystack that could also be a rabbinic decree similar to this Gzeras Oitzer, that what would happen if you did it without lifting up your schach, and instead, you might end up using that for a sukkah without lifting up the schach. And what would end up happening is that it would be puzzled because of ta'asev loimin ha'asui, that you're supposed to make it, and not when it's done automatically. Okay, so getting into the details of the Gemara, the way the Gemara started was that Rabbi Yaakov said, "I heard from Rabbi Yochanan these two laws, and I heard the two reasons, but I don't know which one to attach which law to. Which reason is attached to which law? You could possibly say the reason of our Mishnah with these bundles, you could say is a biblical problem, or you could say it's a rabbinic problem. The same thing you could do with the Gadish." So that basically what he's saying is, one of them is a rabbinic problem, one of them is a biblical problem, because one of them he's using the term, the problem is tasev loimen ha'asi. That sounds a biblical problem. The other one is a gezerah soitzer. That's a rabbinic problem of a decree, and he's not sure which one to attach, which reason to attach to which law. And so so Rabbi Yirmiyah comes along and says, so let's try to figure it out. Now, the good thing is Rabbi Yirmiyah does have one advantage, and that is that he knows a statement from Rabbi Yochanan that it seems that Rabbi Yaakov didn't know. And because he has this information, it gives him a little advantage over here to figure out how to connect the dots and how to attach which reason to which law. What is the law that he knows? He knows the reason for Chavile Kash and Chavile Yetzim, Chavile Zradim, the reason of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah talked about the bundles, where you have these tied up bundles of either straw or twigs or wood, branches, and maybe cane, sugar cane, some type of branches that are moist, and people used to dry them out in order to use for firewood. They also could use it when it's wet, maybe for animal food. Or the final option is you could use it for schach. But so the thing is, these bundles, the Mishnah says, ein masachin behem, you can't use them for schach. And the Reb Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that sometimes a person is going to come from the field and he's going to have such a bundle on his shoulder, and he's going to put it on his schach in order to dry it out. And the Torah says, Tasav Limon Asui. And so the understanding of that statement is that our Mishnah is that it might lead to, if we permit you to do this, it might lead you to doing it in a way that's prohibited. So even though what you're doing is fine, but if we allow it, it's going to lead to a problem. And therefore, it would be the Gemara's term is Gzeras Oitzer. It's a Gezerah that you might want to use this for storage, and then you're going to leave it there for schach, and it would be a problem. Tasav Leimon Aser. Now, Rabbi Yaakov didn't know this statement of Rabbi Chia bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Therefore, he wasn't sure what the reason of our Mishnah is versus the reason of the Mishnah on page 15. Now, Rav Ashi says, who says? How do you know to learn it that way? And each of these Mishnahs, you could learn either way. You could learn our Mishnah is as we learned it, rabbinic, but you could also learn it as a Tasav Lemon Asi problem. That maybe our Mishnah is talking about a case where you put the schach there for the purpose of drying it out. If you put it there for the purpose of drying it out, that would be a biblical problem of Tasav Lemon Asi. So that's another option of learning our Mishnah. And how do you know to learn it this way? And then the Choyted Gadish case, how do you know to learn it that it's a biblical problem there? Maybe over there, it's a rabbinic problem. And it would be like a decree that even though you did it right, but we're afraid, even if you shook it, how could it be a rabbinic problem over there? Over there is a little hard to explain. How would you dig out a sukkah from a haystack, let's say, or from a grain heap? You dug out a sukkah, and it would only be rabbinically a problem. Why? How could that be? It sounds automatic that it has to be biblical. How could you learn it that it's rabbinic? So the answer is because it's possible that the case is talking about, it doesn't say it, but it's possible that you could add a little, uh, you could add in between the lines that the person shook the schach, lifted up the schach, and koshered it and koshered it. And nevertheless, you could still say rabbinically it's a problem because what happens if you didn't do that? That a person might not do that and end up using it for a sukkah. So the Gemara concludes and says that, you know how we know the difference? Because one of the cases says ein mesachachin bahem, and the other one says that it's ein a sukkah. And when you use those terms, it's sort of a it gives you it's those terms give clarity. They mean the same thing, but when you use one of them, it implies rabbinic. If you use the other one, it implies biblical. When it says it's not a sukkah, that sounds like there's no way to make this a sukkah. There's no way this could be considered a sukkah. When it says you don't use it, it gives off more of a rabbinic implication. You can't use it for schach. Can we say it's not a sukkah? I don't know if you could really say it's not a sukkah because biblically maybe it is a sukkah, but you can't use it for schach. And as Tosfos spells out, it's still going to be puzzle. Rabbinically, this is puzzle. You can't say, well, it's okay, I can get away with it. No, it is invalid. This is invalid. It's rabbinic, but it is invalid. And so that's how the Gemara explains the reasoning that Rabbi Yochanan is learning this Mishnah to be a rabbinic Mishnah, and the other Mishnah is going to be a biblical, the biblical problem. Okay, so I just want to share one additional point before we move on, and that is that there is a famous opinion of one of the great halachic authorities, although not everyone agrees with this, but it's an interesting, very interesting opinion about rabbinic law versus biblical law. And that is, do you need to do tshuva, repent, when you transgress by mistake a rabbinic law? Now, we know on biblical laws, you have to shogeg. There's shogeg, you have to bring karbanos, certain sacrifices, and so on. If you do something on purpose, for sure, there's punishments as well. So biblically, there's definitely punishments. There's definitely for even mistakes, even shogeg. But rabbinic law, there could be room. This is the opinion of the Nesivos. He says that rabbinic law, it's very different than the biblical law, he says, because when there's a biblical law, it intrinsically makes that this item is a prohibited item. So, for example, if you have piece of non-kosher meat, that non-kosher meat has intrinsically in it an element that's non-kosher. When it comes to a rabbinic law, let's say something is prohibited rabbinically, he says that item is not, you can't say that that item is intrinsically non-kosher. Let's say rabbinically there's a problem with having it. There's some rabbinic law that prohibits it, but biblically it's kosher. So the item is not intrinsically non-kosher. It's the rabbi said, you can't go to that item. You can't eat that item. So the rabbi spoke to the person. The Torah speaks about the item. The Torah speaks about the chefza. The rabbi spoke about the gavra. There's a famous way of dividing laws of the Torah, if they are gavra or chefza. It's famous hakira, famous way of often different opinions in the Gemara or different ways of understanding certain things. There's often a way of explaining them by saying, well, this rabbi is looking at it from the perspective of the person, the other one is looking at it from the perspective of the item. And often throughout the Shas, you find these type of differences. So here, the Nesivus wants to say that the difference between a biblical law and a rabbinic law is that the biblical law is connected more to the item, and the biblical law is connected to the item. The rabbinic law is more connected to you, and the rabbis told you what you're supposed to do. Now, if you make a mistake on the rabbinic law, that the rabbi spoke to you what you're supposed to do. There's nothing to do tshuva about, because intrinsically you didn't actually sin. In other words, you didn't actually do anything that affected the item. The item, or I should say, the item didn't really affect you in a negative way. You just weren't supposed to do that, but you didn't know any better. So if you didn't know any better, maybe there's no need to do tshuva. If you actually, for example, I'll give you an example. If you ate treif, so the treif that you ate, that's a biblical law. So the treif went into your body. You actually created a whole big problem over here. Yeah, you didn't do it on purpose, but it actually messed things up. So you need to do tshuva. You now benefited. Your body is benefiting, and from that treif of flesh. But let's say something was treif only rabbinically, so it's not really non-kosher. It's the rabbi said you're not supposed to eat that. You ate it. Are you benefiting from something that's intrinsically a problem? No. The rabbi said don't do that. So if you did it by mistake, so you didn't really transgress anything, because it's not like you actively transgressed it. Something somehow by mistake you ended up eating it, but it didn't actually affect you, because what you have inside your body is not non-kosher. So
right, is it, yes, like, let's say you have chicken with cheese, right?
Right, exactly. Chicken would be rabbinic, right? Exactly. Chicken with cheese.
That's rabbinic. So that's you're defining that the item itself is not the prohibition. It's you not being allowed to do it because the rabbi said don't do it.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's a very interesting way of seeing it. But this is the way the Nesivus sees it. And and according to that, if you by mistake ate a chicken cheeseburger, and you, for whatever reason, you thought it was parov cheese, and it turned out to be milchik cheese, you thought it was made out of soy, and it was made out of regular milk. So you transgressed the rabbinic law by mistake. Maybe you don't need to do tshuva. So now, if you connect it with a Hasidic perspective, it actually is more understandable, because according to Hasidus, when you eat non-kosher, you understand that intrinsically there's actually gimel klipos hatmeos. There's the three uncorrectable powers of energy of impurity that are in that food, and those gimel klipos hatmeos, these three energies, the energy from these three impurities, that are three levels of impurity that are in the food. So you understand, if you ate that, so even though you didn't have you did by mistake or whatever, it has an impact on you. Those you absorbed from those, you're getting energy from those powers of impurity. But if it's only rabbinic, and it's only creating a prohibition, but it's not actually intrinsic in the chicken cheeseburger. Intrinsically is not gimel klipos hatmeos. It's not getting its energy from those powers of impurity. So when you ate that, it didn't really have a negative impact on you, and the energy you got from that is you're not taking from those three powers of impurity. So it's possible to understand it at least in that way. Now, I'm not saying that Chassidus agrees with this opinion, but I'm saying if you could understand it a little with the using the Hasidic understanding. But it's possible to say that Chassidus disagrees with this and says that even rabbinic laws are the rabbis had the power to intrinsically create a new energy for this item by prohibiting it. So you could argue and say that the Chassidus doesn't agree with this. I'm just giving that, if you think about it according to the logic, according to the understanding of from the Hasidic perspective, seeing where everything comes from, it's where it gets its energy from. It does give a little you could have a better understanding of these two views. Now, the reason I mention that here is because the Gemara seems to hint to this idea. Why? Because it says when it's a biblical law, what does it say? That it's not a sukkah. The item, it's not a sukkah. When it's a rabbinic law, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, Ein masachet. You aren't allowed to use it for schach. It doesn't say that it's not a sukkah. So it does give a little hint to this idea. Just throwing this, thought that it does give a little, it touches on this idea that rabbinic laws are telling you that you're not allowed to use it, but it's not intrinsically creating a change in the item, that the item now becomes an entity that's prohibited. It's not an entity of prohibition. It's that you are not allowed to eat that. Yes, Jeffrey.
Just a clarification. Who is the author of Nesivos?
The Nesivos is very famous in the Shulchan Aruch of Choshen Mishpat. And to know exactly his name, we're going to have to pull it up because I'm not a good historian. So let me tell you who the Nesivos was. Here, Nesivos is called the Nesivos Mishpat. On Choshen Mishpat, the Nesivos. Rav Yaakov and Yaakov. Oh, that's interesting. Yaakov ben Yaakov Moshe. Is that what it says? Let's see if this pulls up here. Yeah, Rabbi Yaakov from the city of Lisa. He's very famous in Choshen Mishpat, the monetary laws of the Code of Jewish Law, and often he argues on the Ktsois HaChoshen, which is also another popular commentary on the Choshen Mishpat. And I'm sure in Wikipedia you could find a lot about him. Nesivos HaMishpat.
Thank you.
Yaakov ben Yaakov Moshe, Lurberboim. That's interesting that his father had his name. Born in 1770, passed away in 1832.
And what city did you say he was from?
The city of Lisa.
Lieso?
Well, in Hebrew, it's Lamed Yud Samach Aleph.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, that's a little interesting, a little insight over there. Okay, so now we're up to the next Gemara here. We're on page 12b. And I told you yesterday that I would touch upon a question that Ezra had asked about the case of when you actually would leave the schach that are tied on top of your sukkah. It's quite a complicated discussion. In other words, you put the schach there and you put it there tied up in order to dry. And then you decide that you want to use it for schach. And so we know that that's not kosher. Is that non-kosher biblically or rabbinically? You put it there to dry. Now you want to leave it there and use it for shade. And you forgot actually that Sukkot was around the corner. You put it there to dry, and then it's like Yom Kippur is here, and you're like, oh, I'll just leave it there. I'll just have my Sukkah. So what would be the law then?
You would think it's rabbinic, right? It would be.
You put it there for the wrong reason. You put it there to dry. So the question is that itself a case of ta'aseh v'lo menaseh, or is that a rabbinic law that you might lead to a case of ta'aseh v'lo menaseh? What do you think? Is that an actual case of ta'aseh v'lo menaseh, or is it only going to lead to such a thing? You put it there for the wrong reason. It was tied bundles of some type of twigs or hay. You left it there to dry. Now you just want to leave it there for Sukkot. Now that it's been up there, and you just change your mind and say, you know what, I'm just going to leave it there. So normally you have to do an action to build your sukkah kosher. If you built it non-kosher, you got to do something in order to make it kosher. You can't just say, oh, I'm having in mind for shade, it's good enough. So this would be a case. Anyone else want to share what they think? Is that biblically problem? Is that ta'aseh v'lo menaseh, or is that rabbinically a problem? Again, you left it there for the wrong purpose and you did nothing to fix it.
Yeah, but it looks like it's biblical because it's not a sukkah, right? So is
this ta'aseh v'lo menaseh? Is this a case where you did it wrong and you didn't fix it? Yes, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is seemingly a biblical problem. Our Mishnah is not talking about this case. Our Mishnah is talking about a case where you put it there for the right purpose, for shade, and we're afraid that you might end up doing a similar thing when you do it to dry. But our Mishnah talks about a case where you did it for shade, and still we're going to tell you can't use it because the rabbis thought it looked too similar to the other case, and you might end up making a mistake. Another time you'll put it there for drying purposes, and you'll leave it there, and you'll think it's okay. That's our Mishnah. But my case is not the Mishnah. My case is where you had in mind for purposes of drying. You're drying out this firewood, and then you say, you know what, let me leave it there for schach. That case is biblically a problem. Now, how do you fix that? That's the question. How do you fix that? Number one, what happens if you lift it up? If you lift it up and don't untie it, will that work?
Oh, so.
What about if you untie it and don't lift it up? Will that work?
Yeah.
Now, we know if you leave it there, it's biblically a problem. If you don't do anything, it's a biblical. But how do you get around that?
If you untie it, it's fine.
Untie it and?
Then it'll be fine because it
just untie it.
Right. Because
you need to lift it up.
It falls apart. It falls in pieces. So now you're putting all the pieces on.
But did you lift up each piece?
No.
No, you don't think you need to lift up each piece?
You just untie it.
Just untying it should be good enough.
But
how do you differentiate?
You only satisfy one of the two opinions if you do that.
So the best way, the ideal way, I think that's what you're saying, Ezra. The ideal way is to just do everything, untie it and lift it all up. That would be the ideal way, because then you're covering yourself in all options. Untie it and lift it up. But there seems to be a big argument between all the rabbis. According to some, you could just untie it. According to some, you could just lift it up. According to others, you got to do both. It seems like it's a big discussion here. Tosfos on the side over here, the top Tosfos, well, of course on the side, always Tosfos on the side, but Tosfos on the top one, he mentions the last two lines, even if in the beginning you put it there to dry, mahani hatoroson, it helps to untie it. It's as if it's considered a like a lifting up of each piece that we spoke about before. Untying it fixes that problem.
Absolutely.
Untying it would fix it. That's the way Tosfos wants to learn. Again, you got to reconcile this Gemara,
Rabbi, except for one thing.
With the case of Hidla Allah Asa Geffen. In that case, we said you cut it, it's not good enough. So why is this case better where you cut it, you untie it, Why is this going to be better than the earlier case where you cut the branches that were attached to the ground? In that case, it wasn't going to be okay, and you needed to lift them up, according to Shmuel. Here, it seems like you could just untie it, and it would work.
Right, because of Nanua, because they're all moving.
They're not all moving. When you untie it, not necessarily are they all moving. What do you want to say, Ezra?
There's one that's in contact with the sukkah, that when you untie the things, the rest of it will spread out, and so that can be considered like the equivalent of moving them. But there is one that's directly in contact with the sukkah that hasn't been moved,
or maybe the whole bottom row, and maybe a few rows on top of it, right? And Tosfos does not say that it's nianua. It says it's keiluhu nianua delel. It's as if it's the nianua,
right?
Which sounds like for some reason you don't need to do as much as you did there. Here, you somehow can get away with just untying it, and it's considered like the nianua of the earlier case. And
yes, because the asiya is the tying. The thing that's osoi already is the tying up of the bundle. And as soon as you undo that, then it's all separate pieces.
So what you want to say is that you're the one who prohibited it. You're the one who can permit it. By the attached tree, you want to say Hashem tied it. Hashem attached the tree. You got to do a major act to untie it. Is that what you want to say? That because you're the one who tied it, because it was tied by a human, it has to be as long as a human unties it, he's sort of like he permits it. Is that your logic?
You made it into a keli, and now it's not a keli anymore.
Well, it wasn't a keli. The problem that it was tied was that it's the problem was not really the tying part of it. The problem was more that it was put there for drying purposes. It was biblically prohibited to use. It was tasev leimanosa. You put it on the schach to dry. Even if it wasn't tied, it would have been a problem for schach biblically, because you put it there not for shade. And now now all we're telling you is that you can untie it, and at least Tosfos, the way Tosfos, and again, this is not necessarily the accepted view in halacha. We'll have to see in halacha, because there seems to be different ways or different opinions in halacha. It's a little complicated.
But they purposely say chavile. Okay, chavile means that it's tied up. You made it into something.
The chavile is our Mishnah that's talking about the rabbinic problem, where you put it for the right purpose, but we are making a gzeira for this other case. I'm not talking about that case. And Tosfos is not talking about that case. Tosfos is talking about a case where you put it there for the wrong purpose. In the case where you put it there liyabsha, to dry. It's different than the Mishnah. The Mishnah did speak about a case of tying. But we're talking about a case where you put it there to dry. It happens to be tied, you're right. But the case is that it's tied. And all you need to do is to untie it, or to be hatarasan, to untie it. And that will be like a nianua, and it'll permit it. And the question that I'm asking you is, how do you reconcile that with the previous Gemara that talked about cutting the branch that's attached to the ground? And there, it wasn't enough according to Shmuel. Rav said it's enough, but Shmuel held, and it seems like the halacha, at least seemingly the accepted halacha, is you got to lift up each piece of schach because it was attached to the ground before, and even though you cut it now, but it's still problem of tasev leimanosa. But here we're allowing you to somehow just untie it, and then it.
But you had the intention. By untying it, you also show your intention.
And what about by cutting the branch that was attached to the ground before?
So, like the diavad, maybe okay, but
no. Shmuel said it's not okay. You need to. That's
correct.
You need to lift up each piece.
He's consistent later on I think I remember that he also moved the beams in the house when somebody could not leave the house, and he moved the beams in the house that weren't plastered in so that they could be sitting in a sukkah.
Okay, we'll do about the beams in the next few pages. We're going to have two Mishnayos. So we'll
I think it's
let's talk about these two cases and answer this contradiction. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. Yes, Moshe.
Does a matter of merit ayin have effect on this, in the sense that if you cut a branch and somebody's watching, it could be for the purpose of just, getting it out of the way, not using it for stock. If you're going to lift it and you're going to put it on, that does not appear as merit ayin. You're doing something where if somebody accidentally sees it, they're going to say, well, he's using it for stock. He's not using it just to get it out of the way because it's a problem.
So
it'll be the same case. It'll be the same case with the bundle. You cut it and
right.
You lift it because they see that you're using it for stock. You're not just using it to open it, to dry more of it, by opening it. That's the way it appears to me.
So you're saying you need to do both.
You have to do both. I would think you'd have to do both
and lift it up, which makes sense logically. Yeah, that definitely the simple. That would be a simple way of learning this, But of course, Taisus has tell you that the halacha wouldn't be that way according to him, So we have to figure this out. This is an interesting question, but I'm going to leave it for you. Maybe we'll talk about it more on Sunday. That's the question, and how do the other commentaries learn? There definitely are different opinions here. So there is the Bach learns like what we just talked about. The way we said was the simple understanding, and I just mentioned to Moshe. And yesterday I mentioned that opinion, which when Ezra asked the question. But of course, there is discussion, and the Torah says you don't need to untie it; you could just lift it up, which also sounds a little surprising. What would be the question on the Torah? If you lifted it up without untying it and putting it down, what does that sound? Why would that be a problem? Anyone think that should work? If you just lift it up, now you wanna do it right now. So you put it initially for the wrong reason. You put it there to dry. Now you want to put it there for schach. So how about if you just lift it up and put it down?
But the Mishnah says
you didn't untie it. So it doesn't seem to fit with the Mishnah. That's a good point. Jeffrey says this. How could that work? It's ein masachim, but this is a chavile kash that you're putting it down for schach. And the Mishnah says ein masachim. So how could the Torah say that you just you lift it and put it down? So we got a problem with Taisvis. We got a problem with the Torah. Of course, the Bach is the most simple understanding. Anyway, we'll have to take a look on Sunday. Maybe we'll look a little more into this. But that's we're going to leave this as a sort of like homework if anyone wants to look into it. We're going to continue with the next piece of Gemara here. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. We're 3 lines from the top of the page on page 12b. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Before I explain the Gemara, let me just tell you the case before we go through the Gemara. The case is we're going to talk about arrows and how are the arrows made. The arrows made with wood and metal. It was a shaft of wood, like a pole of wood or like a stick of wood, and the end of it had was an arrow that was the arrow part of the arrow. There's the shaft part of the arrow and then the arrow part of the arrow. The arrow was the pointy, pricky, pointy end, and it was made out of metal. And there were 2 ways that it could be attached. Some of them had there was a male and a female that sort of snapped into each other. So you could have the shaft be like a male, where it stuck out, and the arrow part had a female, was more like a receptacle, and it snapped into it. Or you could have the shaft like a female, and it was like a receptacle, and then you had the arrow part was the male. It stuck, and they snapped together that way. So one of them stuck out. One of them had a little. Yes,
I have a good picture.
Okay, sure.
Put the picture.
Yeah, if it's 1 minute, put it up.
There you go.
So the top case is the receptacle, and the shaft fits in, and the bottom case, you see the shaft sticks out, and what happens is the wood there, it doesn't show the wood, but the wood is going to be hollowed, and it's going to be a receptacle to receive a part of that arrow. And the arrow would be, so that the bottom case is the arrow is the male, and the wood is the female receptacle, and the top case was the wood is just a pole, and the arrow is the female receiving the pole. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good. It gives a little more, a little better clarity. Okay, so getting back to our Gemara. Now we'll do it inside. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda says the name of Rav. What happens if you used for your sukkah schach with this chitzim, the arrow, meaning the wood part, means the handle part, I should say, the handle part of the arrow, and you used a male wood part. So we're talking about it's not attached to the arrow. We're talking about that it's separate. It's not an entity where it's attached. It's separate from the it hasn't been put together. So if you have the male wood, so the problem is that it's not really a receptacle. Again, it's just a pole. There's no indention in the wood to receive, to be like a vessel that receives, a clay kibble. So you could call it a keli, it's a vessel, but it's not a clay kibble. It's not a vessel that receives. So it can't be mekabel tuma, can't receive impurity. So even though you could call it a kli, but it's not mekabel tuma, it wouldn't be an entity that's mekabel tuma. Now, would you be allowed to use that for schach? So if it's not able to receive tuma, it should be usable. Kshera, it's kosher for schach. B'nekevos, what happens if the wood is hollowed out and there's like a receptacle in the handle in this pole to receive the arrow that there's a hollow in the wood, so that means that the wood handle is a female, and it's been a kevos, it's psula, it would be invalid for schach. So what happened here is that you have all these the handles to these arrows, and you want to use them for schach. So it depends. If it's a male handle, then it would be usable for schach. If it's a female handle, it's not usable for schach. What does this boil down to? It boils down to, is it mekabel tuma? Is it mekabel tuma? Is it a recipient of tuma? And again, it's called pshute kli'etz. The term, the halachic term is, these are called pshute kli'etz, flat vessels of wood, meaning they don't have a recipient to them. It's not mekabel tuma, it does not receive impurity. But if it's a female, it's no longer called pshute kli'etz. It's not called flat wooden vessels. It's called receptacles. And therefore, it would be mekabel tuma, and it would be invalid for schach. So could you use a handle to an arrow? Yes, if it's a male part. If it's the female, it would be puzzle. So the Gemara says zecharim kshera. So if it's the male pole, So then, or handle, it's kosher. It's kosher. The Gemara says pshit, of course. I mean, what are you adding to our knowledge? That's pretty obvious. The Gemara says, Mao the Tema, what might you have said or thought to say? Mahu the Tema. What would you have? Maybe you will say that Nigzar, we should make a decree. Zecharim atu nekevos. That if some of these are invalid for schach and some are valid for schach, maybe we should say that the male should be invalid because it's very similar to the female wood handle. Kamash Malan, so Rav comes, Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says that, quotes Rav, that Rav said, guess what? We do not make this decree. Kamash Malan, we don't make such a decree. And if you use the male the male handles, it will be kosher.
So, Rabbi,
yes,
these arrowheads they look like they're metal, but are they metal or are they?
The arrowhead is metal, but we're not using the arrowhead. We're only using the wood. It's not attached. Okay. So the Gemara then says,
metal heads. What about stone heads? Makes no difference. Like American Indians, you always see stone heads. They chiseled the stone.
Interesting.
To make it. But
it's not a Gedulei Karka stone. So
no, that's extra. So you throw garbage. You threw a little garbage on also. But it's connected to a shaft. But it would still be a keli. That's the problem.
No. So keep in mind, we're dealing with only the wooden handle. We're not talking at all about the attached
about the head. Correct.
The head.
But if you were talking about the head, could it be included?
No,
it's not. It's a keli.
No, let me just tell you, if it was attached, then we don't care if it's a receptacle or not. It's considered a handle to the arrow, and they will receive tumah because of the metal arrow. Now, when you talk about a stone arrow, so then I would have to think about it because I have to look up what the din of stone is. But metal would be tameh, even though it's not a receptacle, and the handle would be a handle to metal.
Stone does not become tameh.
So pshutei kli even. That would be the term. Pshutei kli matris. Matris is matame by flat. So, but that's why the handle, if it's attached, so if it is attached, then the handle will, no matter what, whether it's male or female, it's going to become tameh, and you can't use that. And even though you want to tell me, oh well, the arrow is a small little thing, and the handle is so much bigger, maybe it's batel. No. If it's attached, the whole thing becomes tameh. The handle becomes tameh as what's called a yad, a base yad it's a handle for the metal, and that would make it a problem. So what your point, I guess, Isaac, is that if it was made out of stone, you might have an option of having the entire arrow kosher for schach if it's because if we don't consider the stone kli or makabel tumah, then you would say that the handle is a handle to something that's not makabel tumah, and maybe it would be kosher for schach. That's what you're right. That's what you're bringing out. An interesting case. Yeah, I have to look into it, but sounds interesting. Yes, Jeffrey.
I don't think that's possible because they still have to attach it. The stone doesn't just stick to the shaft. So
yes, it would be attached. So it's a base yad.
Even if it's flint, it's going to have a cutaway
in the wood in order to
attach the flint, and also
cutaway in the stone,
somewhat tied around.
You couldn't. You're saying you wouldn't be able to fit it. You're saying it wouldn't hold it if it was just a cutaway in the stone.
Correct.
Why they can't make? They're not as good with stone as they are with metal.
It's not a cutaway. It's not a cutaway in the stone. The cutaway is in the end of the wood.
Wood.
And the stone and the arrow has a little protrusion at the not at the pointed end, the other end. And that protrusion fits into the cutaway in the wood. And then I think they tie.
Sometimes they tie.
And
Yeah.
so that it stays in place and doesn't move.
All right. Anyway, it's an interesting
Arrow technology.
Okay, thank you for.
What if the arrow is made of shell material?
Thank you, Green Arrow.
What you asked that, if it's made out of what material?
Shell, SHELL.
What is okay? I don't know. What would that mean?
So like an oyster shell or a seashell. A seashell.
Right.
Isn't Rabbi? Isn't it? It's treif. The shell is treif, so it would be makabel tuma just based on that. I mean,
no.
We're not eating it.
It's not true. There's different. We're not talking about the type of that something is non-kosher. We're talking about if something is makabel tuma, is a recipient of tuma. So it's a different category. So okay. So the Gemara continues over here and says that we just said that we don't make a gzera. So the Gemara says benekevais sula. If it's a female handle, it's psula, it's invalid. But because it's a vessel, it's a recipient, the pshita, the Gemara says that's obvious. So the Gemara says, mahu detema, you might have said that this female wood that's carved out and would be able to receive a metal arrow, it's meant to be filled permanently. It's never meant to take out. Once you stick in that arrow, you never take out the arrow. The arrow stays in forever. So maybe we're not going to call that a kibble. Loish me kibble. Maybe that's not called kibble because it's never meant to be a recipient, really. It's meant to be a solid item that once you stick it in, you can never, it never leaves it. And maybe that would make it that it's not considered a vessel. Kamash Malan comes and lets us hear that that's not true. And the fact that it's there forever, it is still called a base kibble, and it would be invalid for schach.
When did you send the